Happy Monday. If you're with me live, I think pretty much anywhere you are in the world, it will still be Monday. But whatever day or time it is, I'm glad you're here. My name is Kevin Eikenberry. This is another Live with Kevin. Eventually, it will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, which you see up over my shoulder. If you're with us live, I hope that you will say hello and tell us where you're from. And the way to do that is to go in the comments section of whatever social platform you're on right now and just say hello and tell us where you're located. I've got two reasons for doing that. Number one is that I want you to get used to using your fingers on the keyboard, because if you have a question as we go, I hope you'll ask it. I hope you'll share it. And I also just really love to know who's here, because I can't see it otherwise in the live setting on this platform. So while you're here, I hope that you will just imagine that you're joining us, my guest and I, who I'll introduce in a second, for a cup of coffee. So if you were with us live and we were having a real conversation in person, if you had a question, you'd ask it, right? If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you'd offer it. So why not do the same thing by typing now? Your comment might get included in the conversation in one way or the other. Certainly gives me an idea about what's happening and what you're thinking about. And quite honestly, your questions, your comments will make for a better conversation. Eventually, it'll be a better podcast. So that's really what I wanted to say about this on a live setting. Eventually, as I said, in about a month, this will be on the actual podcast feed. So what I'm going to do now is start what will be on the podcast. So Marissa, this is for you in 3, 2, 1. What happened? Excuse me. What does it do that again, Marissa? In 3, 2, 1. What does it mean to be naive? And would you consider that to be a good description of yourself or not? And what does it mean to be our true self? And is that even possible in the world of business and work today? Those are the questions, the deep and important questions my guests and I are going to be talking about today on the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are here helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could have been with us or even future, you could be with us for live episodes, but you have to know when they're happening and where they're happening on your favorite social media channels. And the when you find out by joining one of our online groups. You can join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups to find out the whens and wheres of future episodes. Just go to, it's easy, remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get caught up and clued in about when we'll be live and some other things will happen there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses, picked from one of 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of the leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, now I'm going to bring in our guest. And let me get him here. His name is Joshua Berry, and he is a world-class facilitator of change. As an author, speaker, and entrepreneur, and director of Econic, Joshua has spent the last 2 decades evolving the what, who, and why of Fortune 500 companies and venture-backed startups. Along with his team, Joshua has sparked change in organizations like U.S. Bank, John Deere, Procter & Gamble, Nelnet, Emeritus, the Omaha Public Power District, Farm Credit Services America, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska, and others. He is also the author of the new book, Dare to be Naive, How to Find Your True Self in a Noisy World. Hence all of the questions I shared with you in the open. So Joshua, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Happy Monday, Kevin. Excited to be with you. And it looks like a number of people who are joining us live.
We got people with us live. So now that I'm not reading, let's see what we got. We've got, I'm guessing these are people that know you. We got Lincoln, Nebraska, and Lincoln, Nebraska, and Lincoln, Nebraska. And wow, someone else says Lincoln, Nebraska is representing. And we've got someone in Atlanta as well. I know we got lots of others, folks, but thanks you all for doing that, for sharing those comments. So Josh, what I really want to do is start with that word that's right. Well, let's do this first. First, tell us a little bit about the journey that gets you here. You know, you're a facilitator of change, right? You didn't wake up when you were 10 and say, I'm going to grow up and be a facilitator of change. I'm guessing. You couldn't even spell facilitator when you were 10. Well, I couldn't spell facilitator when I was 10, probably. But seriously, just really quickly, beyond what I've shared, like
Yeah.
sort of how do you end up at this place? Sort of what brings you to doing this work? Just really quickly, kind of tell us.
Absolutely. Well, the fact that you went back to childhood is a great place to start. To be a facilitator of change, you have to go through a lot of change. I lived in over 16 different houses before I was 15. And so I had a lot of change and a lot of practice through that. Eventually in school, going to Nebraska Wesleyan University here in Lincoln, Nebraska, for international business and Spanish. That opened up a career for about 10 years doing work with talent selection and development all around the world, about 30 different countries. And that was eventually then when I went out on my own and started to work with startups and eventually co-founded Econic here in 2015. And yeah, a lot of the work that we do is helping people, as you said, facilitate, which I love that word because it just means to make easy. Change typically is not easy, but we find that with the right approaches and good people, you're able to at least facilitate some of that change. And as you said, we get to do that work with a lot of great organizations here and throughout the world.
Maybe not make it easy, but easier. Right?
Easier. There you go.
I have to show you this if I can find it on my desk. Here it is. You ever seen one of these before? The famous easy button.
Oh, the easy button. Yeah.
Have you ever seen one that said "Facil"?
Bien fácil, bien fácil. Solo tiene que tocar este botón. Sí.
Así de fácil. There you go. Well, yeah, you're the Spanish guy, so like you got that. Anyway, so I think mine is actually French, but there you have it.
It works.
Because someone sent it to me from Montreal, so I'm assuming it's French. So listen, the key word. Well, there's a bunch of important words in the title of the book. Dare to be naive, how to find your true self in a noisy world. But I want to start with that word naive. It's where I started in the intro. Let's just go there. Like you spend the early part of the book talking about it, and I love it because you propose that perhaps the definition that we would use for naive isn't necessarily the most helpful one. So can we talk about that a little bit first?
Absolutely. In some of my research of the best leaders out there, what I saw was a propensity that they were using that word naive almost as a shield, right? They would say things like, this might sound naive, but, and that got me into really digging into, well, why are we so afraid of being naive? And some big aha moments when I actually went back to the root of the word naive. What I learned, Kevin, is that like your ancestors and mine, you're an Eikenberry, I'm a Berry. Maybe we have the same ancestors. I have no idea.
It's possible, right?
Quite possible. But they actually use the word naive more in a neutral to sometimes even positive way. And back then, it meant more like innate or natural or genuine or that thing which you had from the start. And so this idea of daring to be naive, and even when people were using it as a qualifier of like, oh, this might sound naive, what I learned from those people and from a lot of us is that some of these ideas that are often maybe expressed in ideals or optimism or others actually might be coming from a more natural or innate space that we need to maybe dare to be a little bit more of in life.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And you and I have talked about before we went live that I do get lots of books sent to me, and when I saw the word naive, like I said, okay, I know I think I'm going to like this. By the way, for those of you that are podcast listeners or watchers, and you're not necessarily readers, this is a small book. It's not even full size, so like this is very easy to get into and easy to get out of, if you will. And there's a lot you can get out of it. But I was drawn to that word naive as a starting point. I wanted us to start there. But then in the book, you talk about a spectrum, or what I might actually call it attention, because there's a false
dichotomy.
Dichotomy is the right word. Yeah. A false dichotomy that's used between the word pragmatic and naive. And so let's talk about that for a second, because I love this idea of these tensions a lot, actually, because I think that there's lots of places where we need to look at these tensions differently. And this is one of them. So let's just talk about, well, can I be both pragmatic and naive? Is that even possible?
Yeah. To your point, being a paradox or a tension, it's something to manage between those two. So a useful question or tool that I give to people is, does whatever you're about to do feel reasonably and intuitively true? Right? The reasonable side, I think it's at that pragmatic side that when maybe overused can come across as extremely cynical or distrusting. And that naive side, again, and you mentioned it well, like I'm not advocating we completely throw reason out the window and become ignorant or willfully ignorant or anything. It's
Well, we're all
actually,
ignorant, but it's that willful
I said
ignorance.
willfully,
Let's be
willfully
clear. You
ignorant.
did. That was a great qualifier, actually.
But I think what the book invites people into is not, here's a bunch more of the right answers. The book just invites people into a lot of practice around, what do I believe, and how can I bring a little bit more of that intuitive sense? Because I think we've focused so much over the last couple hundred years on just building out this logical, rational brain that when combined with some of those evolutionary aspects that want to protect us, leads to pessimism or cynicism or protectionism or fear or anxiety or any of those things. And so I think we do need to come back into a little bit better balance between those tensions if we want to shape more of the reality that is a hopeful future that I believe is possible.
I just want to draw the connection, everybody. If you watch with me live, or if you're on the podcast, last week's episode was with Lisa Tromba, who's the last two words in the title of her book are rational leadership. And we talked a little bit about that, but the book is really fundamentally about our biases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a strong connection between that conversation and where I believe that this conversation is going to go. And we'll make sure in the show notes that we connect you back to last week's episode as well. So I want to get to all of the belief stuff. Well, really everything we're talking about is the belief stuff, I realize.
Yeah.
But I really want to talk about this idea of true self. Another one of the key words in the subtitle, right, is how to find your true self in a noisy world. Why is finding our true self important?
At the deepest level, I think that's part of our purpose and our meaning here is truly that continued unfolding, uncovering, unlearning of what you're being called to do. And so in terms of the experiences that are put out there, and a lot of the examples I use are work related, I constantly believe that the path in front of us at work is putting forward tests and examples and mirrors that are put up in front of you to say, is this who you are? Is this what you believe? Is this the path you want to be on? Why it's more important now than ever, which is, I think, kind of part of that question, is that people are more lonely and exhausted right now. I saw a survey recently that was specifically focused on burnout that said 69% of leaders say that burnout is impacting their actual ability to make decisions at work. There's all of this stuff that tells me that people are maybe a little bit off in terms of maybe what their true self might be or what they're destined to do. And so being able to create spaces for people to be more intentional and to be able to shut out some of the noise of everything else that's going on and people telling them the way they should be and the way things have to be done, et cetera, to be able to start to wake up and be more conscious about what feels right for me, what is the right next thing, and just whatever that next step is, being able to be more intentional towards it. I think that's the call to what we're being asked to do in work and life.
And those two words come up for me often as I'm reading, and as as I was preparing for our conversation, the words conscious and intentional, because, and we'll get at that a little bit more in a second. But I wrote a long time ago, Joshua, that something along these lines. I mean, I've slept since I wrote it, but I wrote something along the lines of to be a better leader is to become a better human, and vice versa. And so what you just said, everything you just said about why it's important to find our true self and why our true self is so important is true for us as individuals. But I'd like you to lean into that a little bit more, specifically in our role when we put our leader hat on.
Yeah. There's something, and I think it actually is inverse to the higher you go up in the organization, the more you feel like you need to put on a mask, the more you feel like there is a way of being that
you're supposed to be.
You're supposed to be, right? You're supposed to be in these ways. I don't think it's a coincidence that last year's Merriam-Webster word of the year was authentic. And it isn't just because of AI and misinformation and everything that's out there, but I think we're truly in a crisis of like, who am I? And when we're looking to people in leadership, whether it's organizations or community or government or whatever it might be, we're looking for people to have to be intentional, to be something that are worthy of our trust. And so, to your point, the idea of being able to keep coming back and being your true self even more and more as a leader, stepping into that gives permission for other people to also explore what is important for them and what their true self is, right? The acknowledgement of not just, hey, look at the ladder I'm climbing, you should be climbing this ladder too. But even being able to look down and be like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I was told this was the right way to do things. Like there's some of that needs to start to happen, this awakening that needs to happen, especially in leaders, because of the asymmetrical influence they have on being able to change what's going on within organizations and how those impact employees and consumers.
Yeah. And so, yeah. So you're talking about the if it's important for us, we can make it more safer for others to do the same
Yeah.
because we're modeling it.
Yeah.
But I think there's another piece that we can talk about too a little bit, and that is that when we are our authentic self, when we're our true self, when people see that clarity that comes from us as leaders because we have that or are on the path of that,
Yeah.
we're far more influential as well. Like we're far more likely to have folks want to choose to follow us, which is ultimately what it means to be a leader. People choosing to follow us, right? And
Yeah.
we're more likely that people will follow. And if we have that clarity, we're probably leading them towards a valuable place, all of those things. So you really leaned into the role model side of this, which is incredibly important. But anything you want to add to that, sort of our ability to actually be a more effective leader simply because we have that clarity for ourselves?
Well, yeah, I think in terms of the effectiveness, if we want to shift over to team members wanting to be engaged in the work that they're doing, in terms of getting to the results that they need or performance in an organization, when we drop some of the false pretenses of what I'm trying to get you to do, or when we set aside the old ways of using more manipulation and coercion to get people to do stuff, we can have much longer sustainable results, right? And it's because you're not so focused on I'm completely wrapped up in myself is this identity of this work and what needs to get done. So I think that you absolutely can help people have more flow. In fact, you've probably picked up already on the book that I'm kind of a word geek, and I love that the word influence just means in flow.
Yeah.
It literally, the etymology just means you are helping people get to in flow. And I think as a leader, you get to set the tone of which flow you're getting people in. Is it this continual flow that's rewarding few and working everybody else to death in it? Is it the flow that is working from outdated ways of work models? Like what is the flow that you're bringing people into? Or is it a flow that brings about joy and vibrancy for the most amount of people?
So I was just led to decide to share this with you, and I'm confident that you can speak to it, but it's not in the book, right? So in my newsletter last Friday, in part because I was reading this book, I decided in my Friday newsletter, by the way, you all can sign up for it, kevinikenberry.com/newsletters, but it's called Your Remarkable Day. And on Friday, I wrote this. I said, one of my mentors says, if you want to learn something new, read old books. Now I know, Joshua, you're saying, wait a minute, my book's new. You should read my new book.
No, it's not.
But then, so I shared a quote from Emerson, and I'm just going to read the quote
Please
and
do.
let you comment on it. You may already know which one I mean. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. So it's really directly connected to what we're talking about here. Any comment that you want to make to that?
Yeah, it goes back to what I've said about the noise, right? And everything. If you want to shape a new reality, you got to see more clearly the reality that you are in. And so the first way to do that is, as you said, to start to be more conscious about what is it that I want to be, and what are all the other influences that are around there, right? I get into the book these 4 questions.
Yeah, that's actually where I wanted to go next. So let me just frame it.
Using those questions are a great way to be able to start to clarify where's myself versus what the world is wanting me to get into.
Yeah, because it takes us back to what we said earlier, and that's exactly where I wanted to go next, which was that the foundation of all this is, what do we believe? What are our beliefs? And you talk about these 4 questions, and that's like, so I'll just frame this up everybody with this is where Joshua would say, and I agree with him, where our beliefs come from is through these 4 questions. So why don't you just lay those on us?
Yeah, yeah. So this is built upon the work by Byron Katie. It's specifically called The Work, and I just massaged it a bit and have applied it more in the business setting here. But it's truly to help us shine more light on how our beliefs impact our actions, and maybe where you even have limiting beliefs. And so those 4 questions, like, let's assume we're talking about back to the leader who's not being able to show up as their true self, and that person says, like, I can't be authentic in my role. Okay, I would apply these 4 questions to it in a coaching session with that person. Where did you learn that belief that you can't be authentic in your current role? That's question number 1. Second question, is it absolutely true? Is it absolutely true? Is it verifiably, objectively true that you can't be authentic in your current role? And then the last 2 questions that truly get someone into a space of reflection is, what do you gain by holding that belief, I can't be authentic in this role? And the 4th question, what do I lose by holding that belief, I can't be authentic in this role? And even in that example, the gain or lose is always harder depending upon how the belief statement is phrased. But I think self-aware people can start to say, oh, I can see what I lose by not being as authentic in my role. And maybe they get some ahas there. But the tricky one, as those 4 that I put out there, is, what do I gain from this belief, I can't be as authentic in my role? There's probably something that you can really start to uncover and dig into. Maybe this individual is saying, like, what I gain is I hold myself back. I don't have to be vulnerable in this situation. It actually makes it easier, potentially, right, that I do this. And
it feels safer, right?
Feels safer. None of those questions push you to say, and now what are you going to do? And what's your action? It's just the very first step of this. If you're trying to reflect on what is my true self thinking and feeling there, it's orienting more honestly, right, to a belief that you have and that you've held up in the past.
And I think the second question is so important. Like, is this objectively true? Because especially if you're a leader who on that tension of pragmatic versus naive leans more to that pragmatic side, then when you can sort of shine the rational light on the belief to say, is this really objectively true? Can you prove that that's true?
Yeah.
I think that kind of a question it will open people's eyes, minds, hearts, because until that question is answered, you can't. The next 2 are even harder. That's my take.
What 100%. And I'm trying to recall. Did you ever read the book Humankind? I can't recall the author who wrote that.
We'll make sure that we put it in the show notes.
Put that in there.
We've had other authors, by the way, or other guests mention that book. We'll make sure we put that.
So why I pull it out is it's a great book, and it's Hopeful History, I think, is maybe even the subtitle of that book.
A hopeful history of
something.
Yes.
People, something. Yep. But my point in bringing that book up is that it takes this long-held belief by a lot of people of maybe people are innately bad. And it uncovers and goes through rational examples time and time again, during wars, during crises, during all of these sorts of things, and highlights, no, actually time and time again, people show up decent. And like at the core, people are innately good. And yet, if you just held that as, well, this is the commonly held belief, which there's a ton of studies that he cites in there too, about most people assume other people will do wrong, but they don't assume that about themselves.
Yeah.
Or even if you hold that to a distance, it actually does play out that most people are inherently good, and acting from that is an all right thing. So yeah, it's a good book and a fascinating dig into that.
So I want to tell everybody that this idea of basically asking these questions, examining our beliefs, to me, that's the one thing I will take from this book. Like, how do I do that? What are those beliefs that I hold? And we'll just take it, since this is the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. What are those beliefs that I hold as a leader, and how do they end up influencing me in my work? If we don't, we have to be intentional to ask ourselves those questions, because otherwise they're just the sound. Those beliefs are the soundtrack of what we're going to do every day. Right.
Yeah.
And so we have to stop. We have to reflect on them. And you not only tell us to do that in the book, but at the end of every chapter, you have a process to help us do that. Yep. So you want to talk about that. I mean, you can talk about how to do it.
Sure.
and unpack that, and maybe just give us another one of them, right? You just gave
Yeah.
us one, and let's just sort of talk through that third party a little bit.
Sure. The idea of applying those 4 questions, when you start to get used to it, and the way that it works, just to cue it up for each chapter, as you said before, it's a pretty easy read. The audiobook finally got put up on Audible and Spotify this weekend, so you can go see it. It's less than a 4-hour listen. Um, and in those questions at the end of the chapter, they take all the anecdotes and stories from a particular chapter, and then they say, well, what do you actually believe here, and how do you do it? And the chapters cover everything from trusting people too much, right, and prioritizing employee growth, maybe even over company growth, and a number of things that are out there. But the whole point of the book and those things isn't to say, and now that's the right way to do it. In fact, our PR firm kind of jokingly called me the reluctant thought leader, because I said, I honestly don't want to write a book that tells anybody like that's wrong, this is the right way to do it. I just want to create a book that makes space for people to practice how to adapt more than adopt whatever I think the 10 best things of leadership might be. And so I'll apply it here, even with the pragmatic and the naive part. We could take either of those things and say, you should be more pragmatic. Okay, where did you learn that? Is it true? What do you gain and what do you lose by holding that belief? You should be more naive. Where did you learn that? Is it true? What do you gain and what do you lose? You will always gain or lose something, because beliefs are our best guess at reality. And so the whole idea is, people could say, this show with Kevin and Joshua is amazing. Great. Where did you learn that? Is it true? What do you gain and what do you lose?
Wait a minute. All three, the first, yeah, of course, right?
but I'm saying, being able, it's a call to wake up. It's a call to wake up and to realize that in each of these situations, there's going to be gains and losses. And something that I haven't hit on other podcasts yet, but maybe there's a space for it in the future, is that I think we need more of this in general civic dialogue today. And that is, I have a view and I gain and I lose things with my view. And you have a view and you gain and lose things with your view. Can we have a dialogue around some of these things versus I'm 100% right, you're 100% wrong?
Because my narrative, my view, my belief, it is where my truth is, right? Like there's factual truth, and then there's other forms of truth that get down to the narrative. And the only way we get to something where we can come to agreement is where we can find room for both of our narratives.
There you go.
Connected, or that we change our narrative, right?
There you go.
And this book, people that have followed me for a long time, whether it's on this podcast or, and in fact, it's proven at the end of every episode, or whether you follow what I read, what I write, that I am a big believer in reflection and in self-reflection. And one of the things, Joshua, I love about the book is that with those 4 questions, it gives us a way for a certain sorts of things that we would want to reflect on to do it, right? It gives us a way to do it, a very powerful, useful, and yet accessible way to view it. Right. And we'll make sure that we got those 4 questions in the show notes as well, because Lisa needs something to do. No, I'm just teasing, but because they're really useful. And because some of you we know are watching this or listening to this while you're doing something else, right? And you couldn't stop and write them down, and you certainly can go back and do that. But we'll make sure we get those questions in the show notes as well. So, Joshua, before we sort of roll into the final piece of our conversation, is there anything we left out, or is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
No, maybe whether it's to you or whether it's to anybody who's listening, what's coming to me is just, what is a next step that you are wanting to take in life that for some reason or another you're pausing at? And if there was one call to action out of this, it was, could you make space for yourself to say, why? I'm not doing this because what? And take that through these 4 questions, because, talks like this are fun. I love getting to meet great people like you, Kevin. You've been doing this for a long time and you're a pro at it. They only make a difference to me if people are saying, now I can start to reflect and now I take something out of this. And so I hope that somebody can hear this and say, this thing that's keeping me from the best life that I could possibly live, Well, is there a limiting belief there that needs to be awakened or uncovered? And I hope that this is that call to action for you if you're hearing this.
We're talking with Joshua Berry about his new book, Dare to Be Naive, how to find your true self in a noisy world. And I would say that, this is at the intersection of all the conversation about biases, which I mentioned that we talked with Lisa Tromba about last week, but all of the conversations that we've had and that I've had and I've written about around mindset, it's all connected, right?
Yep.
And if we're willing to take the time to shed some light on it, it will help us be happier, healthier, more effective at all of the stuff that we do in our
Absolutely.
lives, not just that of leading. And I believe gets us closer to that adjective in front of leadership called remarkable. So I got a couple of other things, Joshua, I want us to talk about before we go. Questions that
Yep.
I like to ask everybody, and they're
Sure.
kind of different. So one of them is, okay, when you're not doing all this important work, what do you do for fun?
I read. I read a lot. I love to read. I always have 7 or 8 books going on at once. So I read a lot. I play bass guitar, which I enjoy. And then we have 4 school age kids that are 10, 12, 14, and 16. And so right now, a lot of our fun revolves around their activities and the things that they're doing.
And some of your frustration in some cases as well. I'm just saying, mine are older than that. I can say that. And yet a tremendous time in life. And so it's awesome that you get to spend time with them. So speaking of reading,
Mhm.
what is something you're reading now? Like we've already talked about humankind. What would you add to that list that maybe you're reading or recently read? We
Um,
don't have time for
we
all
don't have
seven.
time for all of them. I'll throw 2 book indie type ones out there. I'm really enjoying Outlive by Peter Attia. You haven't read that, it's the art and science of longevity and how we can continue to increase our health span as well as our lifespan. So a lot of great ideas there that I've taken away. And then the second one, To Bless the Space Between Us by John O'Donohue. So on the very opposite other extreme, it's a book of blessings from that Irish author that is wonderful and very contemplative.
Love that. Thank you very much. We'll have both of those in
Mhm.
the show notes, as I mentioned before. So now what's the question that you most want me to ask, even though you said you're reluctant? Like where do you want to point people? If people want to learn more about you, your work,
Sure.
the book, where do you want to point people? What do you want to tell people?
I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you can find me, follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Obviously, there's a number of people already here from LinkedIn or heard about this from that, so keep doing that, please. You can go to the website for the book, daretobenaive.com, and that has additional information as well as a worksheet that you can download that is a nice study guide with it. We also have a book club worksheet in there that's been getting requested more and more. And then our organization's website, Econic, econic.co, econic.co. I'm sure there's other websites out there too that are connected to it. But and then just a plug again, as I said at the beginning, we recorded the audiobook back in October. It'd been taking a long time to work through all of the channels, and it finally, one of my kids showed me that it was up on Audible and Spotify this weekend. So I'm excited for that to be out there.
And did you read it?
I did. So if you'd like to hear about Dare to Be Naive,
I
you
love
can
that.
grab
So
me as
that's
the
been
narrator.
on my list. And so I believe that my next one, that's what's going to happen on
Oh, it was so
my
fun.
next
You should
vacation.
totally do it, Kevin.
Yeah,
It,
I've been
it
wanting
was fun.
to, and I expect that that's what's going to happen next. We've had a number of other people join us as we've gone. I haven't had a chance to get to show all those comments. I appreciate all of you being here. But listen, there's a question that is totally related to what we've been talking about here that I ask at the end of every single episode. It's my favorite reflective question. It is simply this: now what? Like, what are you going to do with this? It's one thing to have enjoyed this. It's another thing to have nodded your head and go, yeah, that's good. It's very different from saying, I'm going to take a belief and I'm going to analyze it using these 4 questions, or I'm going to go get a copy of this book, or I'm going to go do whatever it is that was mentally highlighted or was literally written down by you during the last 34 minutes. Like, what are you going to do with what you got? That's the key, because until you do that, this will be nothing more than enjoyment. And while we hope you enjoyed it, there's a lot more to take from it than that. So listen, I want to thank you, Joshua, for being here. It was super fun to get to know you a little bit and for us to share some time after having read your book. And I'm confident that everyone that's joining us, whether they're with us now live or whether it's later video or audio, would be thanking you as well. So thanks so much for being here.
Kevin, this was great. You've been a great host. Thanks, everybody. And for everybody who joined and will listen to it later, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all.
And with that, everybody, I hope you found this useful. If you did, tell somebody else. Leave a comment on whatever podcast channel you happen to be listening to this on. If you're not subscribed to this podcast, do that as well. You know all that stuff. Just make sure you come back next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.